If you are unfamiliar with the subject of this episode, you might have vague memories of it if you remember the pilot of the show, where I flashed the poster of this movie a couple of times in reference to it kickstarting the Blaxploitation genre. Since I fancy myself somewhat of a film buff, I had some vague understandings about this, the X rating, and the Blaxploitation genre. However, unfortunately, at the time, I couldn't find the movie and watch it for myself. I mean, it wasn't available at stores, it wasn't available on any streaming services, it wasn't available on streaming services. The closest thing you could get to seeing it would be trying to track down a used DVD on eBay, and I wasn't particularly interested, so I figured that I would just look into it and hope that that was the next best thing. However, when I decided to look into the history of this product, I found myself even more fascinated by it, causing me to want to see it even more, and eventually, I did. Was it worth the wait? Well, let's just get into the background first. The film was directed by Melvin Van Peebles, a struggling director who couldn't find work in America due to his race. So he went to France, as they weren't as racist, and he was able to direct his first mainstream film, The Story of a 3-Day Pass, a film about his struggles finding work, which ended up getting the attention of Hollywood, who mistook him for a Frenchman, and he finally managed to make a feature film in America, a film known as Watermelon Man, a movie about a casually racist liberal who wakes up as a black man. Watermelon Man did so well that he was offered a 3-picture deal with Columbia Pictures. While Peebles liked the idea, he felt constrained in his messaging in the movie and sought to make a more radical-oriented film. In his own words, a movie about a brother getting the man's foot out of his ass. Due to this, he was turned down for a 3-picture deal and had to finance the film independently, spending $1,500,000 on it, $50,000 of which was a loan from Bill Cosby. The film in question would be Sweetback's Badass Song. The film stars Sweetback, played by Peebles. He works in a brothel that raised him ever since he was a kid. Some cops show up and make a deal with Sweetback's boss, Beetle, played by 𝔓𝔞𝔰𝔱𝔢𝔰, to have Sweetback arrested for a bit so they can appease their bosses. While they are taking Sweetback into custody, they find a Black Panther named Moo, played by Hubert Scales, and start beating him. Sweetback then decides to stop them, beating the police officers to near death. The rest of the film is him on the run from the law. Yeah, plot-wise, the film is pretty basic. It's basically Sweetback runs to a location, meets someone that A, can't help them, B, he has to fight, or C, he has to love. After he does one of those 3 things, Sweetback runs to a different location. Cut to police officers going, "Where the heck is that new?" Sweetback then runs more, and rinse and repeat, and the scenes drag on. Now, aside from very obvious things that I'm going to get to in a second, what did I, for the most part, think of the movie? Well, if I had to describe this movie, I would say it's very late 60s, early 70s, for better and for worse. The music and looks are amazing. I love them. But the only other film that I remember from this time period is 2001: A Space Odyssey. I love 2001: A Space Odyssey. It is really good, but it's slow. And this movie suffers a very similar problem. As I mentioned before, the plot is rather lax. And that description I gave earlier about, like, it's basically Sweetback goes to a location, does one of 3 things, and then leaves to another location, is met with the same thing, and then does it over and over and over again. That is literally what happens. Now I hear you say, there's literally a trend where you simplify a movie so much so that it sounds incredibly boring, but the thing is, with the rest of these movies, you add like a ton of layers, characters, the plot, etc. But as I said, plot of the film is pretty basic, and Sweetback is a pretty basic character. In fact, he's barely a character. He's basically here just to give this look throughout the entirety of the movie, and that's that. The interestingness is not Sweetback, it's basically everything that happens around him that's interesting. I should also add this very big disclaimer to anybody who intends to watch this movie. The movie begins with an unstimulated sex scene involving somebody who at the time of filming was 14 years old, and it plays for the entirety of the open credits, which is why I am not linking where I found the movie and or saying where I found the movie, because that is all sorts of wrong. But of course, it wouldn't be on this show unless it had something interesting to do with politics. And I think it's pretty obvious what it's supposed to be. The film is very obviously meant to be related to the Black Power movement of the 60s and 70s, and it wears that very heavily on its sleeve. From the amazing soundtrack by Earth, Wind & Fire, to the film very heavily revolving around black issues and black neighborhoods, to the fact that it credits its cast as the black community, this film is very much meant for a particular audience, and it's really proud in doing so. Another way to show this is based on people's reactions to the film. One person in particular, Black Panther Party founder Huey P. Newton, who upon seeing it wrote a very long review praising it for being the first truly revolutionary black film made. I originally wanted to go over his entire review and explain a lot of the things in it, but it is really, really long. So I'll include a link in the description if you want to read it for yourself. However, I will include 4 of his biggest points. First, he sees the women in the brothel that raise Sweetback as symbology of Mother Africa providing for black people. Secondly, he sees Sweetback's silence and lack of character as a way to make him an XP for the entire black community. You know, they can see themselves in him. And the biggest one that can be divided into many points are in regards to the sex scenes. You see, the unstimulated sex scenes very much got this film an X rating, which Huey saw as a very bad thing, thinking that that X basically just made people think, oh, this is just a sex movie, when he saw the sex scenes that happened as, again, very symbolic. First, there's a scene where Sweetback has to go to a black woman to get him out of handcuffs that the police put him in, and she tells him to beg, but he can no longer beg because he has been liberated. So instead of them having sex for pleasure, he sees it as them strengthening their unity, black women and black men being liberated. There's a scene later in the film where he has sex with a white woman, and he sees that as, again, a form of liberation. He even manages to make that very uncomfortable beginning somehow make sense. Because in that scene, church music plays, and Huey sees it as Sweetback essentially being baptized, and him maturing into the man that we see in the rest of the movie. Don't think all of the points that he makes are positive. You see, he actually gives one critique that I'm aware of in that review. The scene where Sweetback saves Moo Moo, he argues, should have also had church music playing in the background, as this is another form of baptism for Sweetback. He is now being baptized into the radical Black Power movement. So yeah, if you're interested in this movie, by all means, look for it and find out for yourselves if it's worth the watch. Oh, and just in case any of you decide to take that clip at the beginning out of context, cut to police officers going, "Where the heck is that Nimrod?" Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and click the bell to notify when the future video mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or very much consider supporting me on Patreon.
I know, right? I was his pride and joy.
Figured that he would abandon us, but then what tried to continue me as a web coming.
I am so fucking pissed.
Or, you know, we could do literally the exact opposite of that.